The music industry has recorded many feuds, but have you ever wondered which rock stars Metallica's drummer couldn't stand? From backstage drama to brutal honesty, Lars Ulrich spills the beans on the 5 musicians he disliked the most. Let's find out who made the list and why. In the early 1990s, rock music stood at its peak. Grunge was rising, metal was dominating, and 2 of the most powerful bands of the time, Metallica and Guns N' Roses, were riding high on waves of global success. Both bands had redefined what it meant to be rock icons. Metallica with their intense, no-nonsense thrash metal approach, and Guns N' Roses with their dangerous swagger and unpredictable energy. In 1992, the 2 groups joined forces for a massive co-headlining North American tour, an idea that seemed too good to fail. But beneath the surface, a storm was brewing. At the storm's center were 2 outsized personalities: Lars Ulrich, Metallica's driven, detail-oriented drummer, and Axl Rose, Guns N' Roses' volatile and theatrical frontman. Though they were both crucial to their band's success, they could not have been more different in style, temperament, and attitude. The result? It was one of the most infamous rock tour meltdowns of the decade, and a long-standing feud that remains the stuff of legend. Lars Ulrich, co-founder of Metallica, had a reputation as a perfectionist. He was deeply committed to giving fans a powerful, tight, and timely performance every night. Metallica's work ethic was military-like, rehearsed, precise, and reliable. Axl Rose, by contrast, was a raw force of nature. Brilliant on stage when he wanted to be, but also famously erratic, frequently arriving hours late, canceling shows, or launching into angry tirades mid-concert. To Lars, this behavior represented everything he despised as a professional musician. The tour's breaking point came on August 8, 1992, in Montreal. Metallica took the stage first, but disaster struck during Fade to Black, when frontman James Hetfield accidentally walked into a pyrotechnics blast and suffered serious burns. The band was forced to cut their set short, and Hetfield was rushed to the hospital. Fans were concerned and disappointed, but hopeful that Guns N' Roses could salvage the night. Instead, the situation went from bad to worse. Guns N' Roses took the stage, but only played a few songs before Axl suddenly walked off, citing vocal problems and technical issues. The crowd erupted in anger, and the unrest quickly spiraled into a full-blown riot. Chairs were torn from the floor, merchandise booths were looted, and fires were set. It was chaos, and in many ways, it symbolized the chaos behind the scenes. Lars Ulrich was livid. From his perspective, Axl had abandoned the fans when they needed him most. Metallica had done everything in its power to give people a great show, even under tragic circumstances. To Lars, Axl's behavior was self-centered and unprofessional. The animosity between them intensified. But it wasn't just that night in Montreal. Throughout the tour, tensions simmered. Axl frequently targeted Metallica in his public rants, accusing Lars of copying ideas and mocking the band's style. He reportedly saw Metallica as rivals, not partners. Lars, on the other hand, largely avoided the press attacks, but his disdain was obvious to those around him. While he didn't blast Axl in interviews, he made it clear behind closed doors that the relationship was strained beyond repair. The feud wasn't just personal, it reflected deeper differences between the 2 bands. Metallica thrived on discipline and consistency. Guns N' Roses thrived on chaos and unpredictability. The tour, which was supposed to unite 2 rock titans, devolved into a battle of egos, as former GNR drummer Matt Sorum later described it. Each group wanted to dominate the spotlight, and instead of collaborating, they found themselves locked in an undeclared war for superiority. As the tour dragged on, morale sank. What began with excitement and friendship quickly turned into survival. Fans and crew alike noticed the frost between the bands. Off stage, the groups barely interacted. On stage, they were separated by a gulf of resentment. After the tour ended, the 2 bands went their separate ways, and so did Lars and Axl. Over the years, the feud lingered. Axl continued taking jabs in interviews, while Lars chose a more diplomatic, if chilly, silence. There was no reconciliation, no dramatic public showdown, just distance. Still, time has a way of cooling even the hottest flames. As the years passed, both men matured. Their chaotic youth gave way to legacy careers. Metallica became a global icon, and Guns N' Roses went through breakups and reunions. When GNAR reformed in 2016, Lars publicly said he was happy to see them back together and even praised Axl Rose as one of the best frontmen ever. Whether the comment was genuine or slightly sarcastic remains unclear, but it marked a shift in tone. Axl, for his part, hasn't spoken much about Metallica in recent years. Whether out of indifference or exhaustion, he seems to have let the feud fade into history. But despite this apparent truce, Lars and Axl have never performed together since 1992 and have never shared a joint interview. A clear sign that, while the war may be over, the wound's never fully healed. Lars Ulrich versus Dave Grohl. In the sprawling world of rock and roll, few figures are more universally admired than Dave Grohl. With his unstoppable energy, signature scream laugh, and a reputation as the nicest guy in rock, Grohl has won over generations of fans, from his time behind the drums in Nirvana to fronting Foo Fighters, and through countless collaborations in between. He's the kind of guy who jams with legends one day and plays dive bars the next, all while cracking jokes and flashing that disarming grin. But even the nicest guy can rub someone the wrong way. And one of the people Dave Grohl has quietly clashed with over the years is Lars Ulrich, the passionate and polarizing drummer of Metallica. In 2000, the music world was changing fast. Digital downloads were exploding, and Napster became the go-to site for millions of users to share music, legally murky but revolutionary. When Metallica discovered their unreleased song, I Disappear, had leaked online, Lars Ulrich took a hard stance. He sued Napster, becoming the face of the fight against digital piracy. To Lars, it was about protecting artists' rights, but to many fans, it looked like greed. Metallica had once been an anti-establishment icon, and now their drummer was showing up in courtrooms, demanding control and compensation. Protesters lined the sidewalks. Metallica CDs were stomped on in protest. Suddenly, Lars wasn't a hero. He was the man. At the time, Dave Grohl didn't come out guns blazing, but he made a comment that landed like a punch to Lars's gut. While acknowledging that Ulrich had a point, Grohl quipped, "If someone sold 50 million records and made $50 million, they shouldn't complain about a few pennies." It was meant to be casual, maybe even funny, but for Lars, it wasn't. That quote stuck. It pierced the heart of how Lars saw himself, not as a rich rock star protecting his empire, but as an artist standing up for creative ownership. From that moment on, Dave Grohl became someone Lars Ulrich pretended to like. On the surface, everything seemed cordial. The interviews were friendly, smiles were exchanged. But behind the scenes, there was distance and some quiet resentment. The tension surfaced again in 2008 during Metallica's promotional tour for their album Death Magnetic. In a now famous backstage moment, Dave Grohl and Foo Fighters drummer Taylor Hawkins showed up to interview Metallica. They were loud, funny, and seemed genuinely thrilled to be there. Fans loved it. It looked like two generations of rock royalty coming together. But Lars was just playing along. Underneath his smile, he hadn't forgotten Grohl's Napster jab. He felt like Grohl had painted him as a villain in the public eye, and that kind of image was hard to shake. Dave even told a story during the encounter about Lars once trying to convince him to fly to Vegas on a whim, just for fun. Grohl laughed and said, "I wanted to be Lars Ulrich so bad." Everyone chuckled. But to Lars, it felt like another dig. Was Grohl poking fun at his larger-than-life rock star persona? Was he making light of the seriousness with which Lars approached his career? It didn't sit well. Later, Lars attended a Foo Fighters show, maybe out of curiosity, or maybe to extend an olive branch. But what he found backstage wasn't chaos or drama. It was a laid-back hangout full of laughter, cold drinks, and good vibes. Everyone adored Dave. Everyone felt welcome. The contrast was sharp. Metallica's backstage environment was intense, focused, and sometimes even strained. Lars couldn't help but notice the difference, and it bugged him. To Lars, Dave Grohl had everything. He could be goofy, make off-the-cuff remarks, joke about other musicians, and still come off as charming and cool. Meanwhile, Lars, who had spent decades pouring himself into Metallica's perfectionism and vision, was constantly criticized for taking things too seriously or caring too much about money. It felt unfair. And no matter how many times they crossed paths, that sense of being misunderstood lingered. Even today, the relationship remains complex. Lars is always polite in public. He'll shake Dave's hand, maybe even hug him, but that doesn't mean everything is cool behind the scenes. The Napster comment may seem like ancient history to some, but to Lars, it was a moment that shifted how he saw Grohl. Lars Ulrich versus James Hetfield. Metallica, the band that reshaped heavy metal and conquered the globe, has always projected the image of a tight-knit brotherhood. But beneath the thundering guitars and blazing drums lies a complex, tension-filled relationship between two of its core members. Lars Ulrich, the ambitious drummer and co-founder, and James Hetfield, the iconic frontman and guitarist. While their partnership gave birth to one of the most influential bands in rock history, their dynamic has often been defined by quiet conflict, creative battles, and a slow-burning resentment that shaped Metallica in profound ways. From the band's earliest days, Lars and James were very different people. Lars, raised in a cultured European household, was driven, opinionated, and always thinking about what was next. He loved taking risks and pushing Metallica in new directions, whether musically or professionally. James, on the other hand, came from a rougher background. He was emotionally guarded, intensely loyal to Metallica's raw sound, and deeply suspicious of change. What began as simple musical disagreements soon evolved into a power struggle. Lars often felt like James was too stubborn, too stuck in the past. Whenever Lars suggested new rhythms, arrangements, or a shift in style, James would shoot the idea down, saying it would ruin the band's identity. Lars saw it differently. To him, evolution was survival. But with James constantly resisting innovation, Lars felt creatively stifled and dismissed. He wasn't just the drummer, he was the band's co-founder, but James seemed to believe Metallica was his to command. Over time, Lars's frustration began to fester. That frustration turned into full-on resentment during the early 2000s, particularly during the turbulent making of the Saint Anger album. With bassist Jason Newsted having quit the band, Hetfield entering rehab, and the band barely holding together, tensions exploded. The Some Kind of Monster documentary showed the world just how deep the cracks had become. In one scene, Lars and James engage in a brutal verbal brawl, yelling, swearing, and accusing each other of betrayal and control. Lars was visibly fed up. It wasn't just about the music anymore. It was about respect, identity, and power. Lars seriously considered walking away. Part of what made things worse for Lars was how the world saw James. As the voice and face of Metallica, Hetfield got the glory. He was the one fans quoted, the one on the magazine covers, the one who stood at center stage under the spotlight. Lars, meanwhile, was the guy behind the kit, the drummer who happened to talk a lot. This imbalance hit Lars hard. He had put just as much into the band, made just as many decisions, and fought just as fiercely to protect Metallica's legacy. But somehow, James always seemed to come out looking like the hero, while Lars got painted as the villain, the businessman, the control freak. Behind closed doors, their relationship wasn't much better. Long tours became minefields. Lars and James barely spoke unless they were arguing about music, strategy, or the band's future. Lars tried to avoid him when he could, preferring silence to confrontation. He sometimes imagined a Metallica without James, without the tension, without the constant fight for control. But he knew that dream could never be real. James's voice, his writing, and his presence were core to Metallica's identity. And that contradiction only deepened Lars's internal conflict. To the public, though, none of this was obvious. Lars and James stood side by side, grinning on red carpets, performing like a united force on stage, and giving interviews full of camaraderie. But those smiles were often masks. Lars knew that showing his true feelings would crack the image of Metallica, and perhaps even threaten its future. So he kept it bottled up. Every public joke, every handshake, every compliment, those were rehearsed lines in a long-running act. The emotional toll on the rest of the band was real. Kirk Hammett and Robert Trujillo have both hinted at how the friction between Lars and James created constant tension within the group. Rehearsals could become uncomfortable and sessions unpredictable, but neither Lars nor James was willing to surrender ground. It was a Cold War fueled by ego, history, and a deep need to be right. And yet, paradoxically, that very friction became part of Metallica's power. Their greatest albums often came out of their ugliest battles. The rage, the intensity, the raw aggression, they weren't just performances. They were real emotions forged in real conflict. Lars's dislike for James may have fueled some of Metallica's most ferocious music. Without that tension, perhaps Metallica wouldn't have had the same edge. Over the years, the feud hasn't disappeared. It's simply changed form. Lars now refers to James as his longest relationship outside of family, a line that's both affectionate and revealing. They know each other's flaws, inside and out. They've fought more than many brothers ever will, and still they keep playing. Lars Ulrich versus Dave Mustaine. The story of Lars Ulrich and Dave Mustaine, the founder of Megadeth and the original lead guitarist of Metallica, is one of the most intense, emotional, and dramatic rivalries in rock history. It's not just a tale of musical differences or personal clashes, it's a story of betrayal, bitterness, and a friendship gone wrong. And even though decades have passed since their falling out, the shadow of that conflict still hangs over both men. In the early 1980s, Dave Mustaine was a crucial part of Metallica's rise. His fierce guitar playing and aggressive attitude helped define the band's raw, thrashing early sound. But from the start, there were problems. Mustaine was wild. His drinking, substance use, and fiery temper created constant tension. Lars Ulrich and James Hetfield saw the chaos Dave brought with him and grew tired of trying to manage it. But for Lars, the problem went even deeper. Lars didn't just see Dave as a liability, he saw him as a threat. Dave had a strong personality, loud opinions, and a drive to lead. He wasn't afraid to challenge Lars, and that made Lars uncomfortable. Lars had a vision for Metallica and didn't want someone else hijacking the direction of the band. Eventually, Lars pushed for Mustaine to be kicked out, and in 1983, just before Metallica recorded their debut album, Kill 'Em All, Dave was fired. The way it happened made everything worse. No warning, no final conversation. One morning, Dave was put on a Greyhound bus from New York to California, with nothing but a hangover and a bitter taste in his mouth. He felt betrayed, not just because he was fired, but because he believed he had written a significant portion of Metallica's early music, especially on their No Life Till Leather demo, and wasn't getting credit or royalties. He was hurt, humiliated, and angry, and he focused all that rage on Lars Ulrich. Over the years, Dave has talked openly about how much that moment changed him. He called Lars controlling, manipulative, and selfish. He accused him of stealing credit, rewriting history, and trying to erase Dave's role in Metallica. Lars, on the other hand, rarely addressed Dave directly. He kept a cool, almost dismissive distance. When he did talk about Dave, it was often with a sharp edge, as if he still held resentment toward what Dave represented, a chaotic chapter of Metallica's past that Lars wanted to forget. What made it even more complicated was that Dave Mustaine didn't just disappear. He went on to form Megadeth, a band built from the ashes of that betrayal. And Megadeth became one of the Big Four alongside Metallica, Slayer, and Anthrax. Mustaine was determined to prove he could succeed without Lars and Metallica, and in many ways he did. But that success didn't erase the bitterness. In interviews, Dave would constantly bring up Metallica, sometimes praising them, sometimes slamming them, but always making it clear the wound had never healed. Despite all the anger, there have been moments when things seemed to thaw. One of the most surprising came in 2010 when Mustaine joined Metallica on stage for their 30th anniversary celebration. Watching Dave jam with his former bandmates gave fans a glimmer of hope that maybe the feud was softening. It wasn't a full reconciliation, but it was something. Dave has also expressed a desire to reconnect with James Hetfield. In interviews, he said that he misses James and would like to work with him again, showing that beneath the bitterness, there's still a longing for the brotherhood they once had. But with Lars, things remain complicated. They smile in photos and nod politely in documentaries, but the tension is still there, palpable, cold, unresolved. The peace has always been fragile. Comments in interviews, small jabs about the past, about who wrote what, or who was more responsible for the early success continue to stir the pot. For all the respect they might have for each other's talent, there's still something unfinished between Lars and Dave. Lars Ulrich versus Jason Newsted. While Jason Newsted often speaks kindly in interviews, and Lars Ulrich flashes his familiar polite smile when asked about the past, many longtime fans believe something deeper and maybe darker still lingers beneath those words and photo ops. It's not open war, not anymore, but the silence between them speaks volumes. Jason Newsted entered Metallica in 1986, walking into a storm. Cliff Burton had just died in a tragic bus accident, and the band was torn apart by grief. Jason wasn't replacing a bassist, he was stepping into the ghost of a legend. And from the start, the welcome was cold. He wasn't treated like a brother, or even a full member. He was the outsider, the new guy, the hired gun. Still, Jason didn't flinch. He brought ferocious energy, unshakable dedication, and a thunderous bass tone that gave Metallica's live sound more muscle than ever. His playing was tight, aggressive, and full of raw grit. He recorded on 5 major releases: And Justice for All, The Black Album, Load, Reload, and Garage Inc. He toured relentlessly, headbanged until his neck gave out, and gave everything he had to Metallica. And fans noticed. To many, he was the backbone of the band's second era. But behind the scenes, things were more complicated. James Hetfield and Kirk Hammett eventually began to open up to Jason, but Lars Ulrich kept his distance. Lars had always been the architect, the one steering the ship. And Jason? He had ideas. He wanted to write songs, contribute creatively, and even sing background vocals. But time and again, those efforts were ignored, minimized, or outright shut down. It wasn't just about music, it was about power. Lars, known for his intense control over the band's direction, wasn't ready to share the spotlight or loosen his grip. Jason's ambition wasn't welcomed, it was viewed as a challenge. And that unspoken conflict built up over the years, album after album, tour after tour. Jason gave everything, but what he got in return felt limited, filtered, and controlled. In 2001, Jason finally left Metallica. Publicly, he said it was to focus on his music and to protect his health. But over time, bits of the deeper truth emerged. Jason felt ignored, creatively stifled, and emotionally drained. He was burned out by not being heard. The documentary, Some Kind of Monster, peeled back the curtain. It revealed just how toxic things had become. In it, Lars often brushes off Jason's importance, even showing flashes of resentment. It wasn't just business. There was something personal in how Lars talked about Jason, something sharp and unresolved. And yet, in the years that followed, Jason surprised many fans. He defended Lars's drumming when others mocked it. He called him a great musician and claimed they still keep in touch. It sounded respectful, mature. But is it real admiration or just diplomacy? Some believe Jason is simply choosing peace. He's older now, wiser. He knows the cost of old grudges. Others suspect it's politeness masking deeper wounds that never fully healed. Lars, meanwhile, has made rare, careful confessions. He's admitted that Metallica didn't handle Jason's exit well, that he and James were blind to what Jason needed. But even those admissions feel guarded. Lars doesn't do vulnerability. His pride has always been his armor. He reflects, but he doesn't unravel. So now, when Jason and Lars share a stage or pose for a photo, fans cheer. They hope it means things are better. Maybe they are. But those who've followed the story closely and who watched Jason give his all for 15 years and still walk away empty know the truth is more complicated. The smiles may be real, but so is the history behind them. That pain never left. It just got quieter. In a way, Lars and Jason are like two giant pieces of the earth, pressed up against each other, strong, steady, and mostly quiet. On the surface, things seem calm. They can be in the same room, smile for a photo, or even stand on the same stage. But underneath, there's still pressure that hasn't gone away. It's been building for years. They learned how to work around each other and how to keep things polite. But the tension from the past, hurt feelings, power struggles, and things left unsaid didn't disappear. It was never fully dealt with. Instead, it was pushed down, buried under time and distance.